They called them the perfect couple. David Thompson was 50, Priya Sharma was 20. He was the successful Toronto tech executive living his dream. She was the beautiful young Indian bride who seemed to adore him. Their wedding photos went viral on social media, a real-life fairy tale that made people believe in love again. But behind those perfect smiles was a web of lies so twisted, it would end in cold-blooded murder. This is the story of how 20-year-old Priya Sharma turned 50-year-old David Thompson's midlife dreams into his worst nightmare. How an innocent-looking bride became a calculating killer. And how what started as the wedding of the year in Toronto's elite tech circle became the crime that shocked an entire nation. Because when David discovered the truth about their marriage and decided to expose Priya's green card scam, she didn't just plan to disappear. She planned to make him disappear. Forever. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about love, trust, and the deadly price of a Canadian passport. David Thompson had everything a man could want, except the one thing that mattered most to him, someone to share it with. Born and raised in Toronto's affluent Forest Hill neighborhood, David had built an empire in the tech world over his 25-year career. As Senior VP of Technology at one of Toronto's most successful tech unicorns, he commanded a $350,000 annual salary plus significant stock options that had made him a millionaire several times over. His $2.3 million penthouse condo overlooked Lake Ontario, offering breathtaking views of the city he'd conquered professionally. But success in boardrooms hadn't translated to happiness at home. 18 months earlier, his world had crumbled when his wife Patricia left him after 20 years of marriage. The betrayal cut deep. She'd fallen for a younger colleague, someone half David's age who made him feel ancient and obsolete. His two college-aged children, Marcus and Sophie, had sided with their mother during the bitter divorce proceedings. Now 22 and 19 respectively, they rarely visited their father, leaving him alone in his palatial penthouse with nothing but the echo of his own footsteps for company. The divorce had shattered more than just David's heart. It had destroyed his sense of self-worth. Here was a man known in Toronto's tech circles as the comeback king, someone who could resurrect failing startups and turn code into gold. Yet he couldn't keep his own marriage alive. Every night, he'd sit in his home office, staring at the city lights below, writing painful journal entries about feeling invisible and unwanted despite all his success. The words poured out like blood from a wound that wouldn't heal. Desperate to prove he still had value, David threw himself into what his friends mockingly called his midlife crisis phase. He bought a cherry-red Porsche that roared through Toronto's streets like a mechanical cry for attention. His conservative business wardrobe gave way to expensive designer clothes that made him look like he was trying too hard. Most telling of all, David started attending young professional networking events around the city. His friends Michael and Robert would joke that he was trying to date like he's 30 again. But beneath their laughter was genuine concern. They watched their successful friend transform into someone desperate for validation. Someone whose need to be seen as a protector and provider again made him vulnerable in ways that success couldn't shield him from. What David didn't know was that his vulnerability was exactly what made him the perfect target. 3,000 miles away from David's penthouse, in a cramped shared apartment near the University of Toronto campus, Priya Sharma was fighting her own desperate battle against time. At just 20 years old, this devastatingly beautiful international student from Mumbai carried the weight of her entire family's future on her shoulders. Her student visa would expire in just 14 months, and with it, all hope of the better life she'd promised to deliver. Priya's journey to Canada had begun with such promise. As a sophomore studying computer engineering at the University of Toronto, she was brilliant enough to have started her academic career at the prestigious IIT Delhi, studying chemistry before making the strategic switch to engineering for better Canadian immigration prospects. Her exceptional intelligence was carefully hidden behind an innocent appearance that made professors and classmates alike underestimate her calculating mind. But brilliance didn't pay bills or ease the crushing financial pressure that kept her awake at night. Working part-time at an upscale Yorkville boutique, she made barely enough to cover her basic expenses while accumulating debt that now totaled over $80,000. Back home in Mumbai, her parents Meera and Rajesh had borrowed against their modest home to fund her Canadian education. Every video call with her family was a reminder of the sacrifice they'd made and the expectations that rested on her success. The calls were heartbreaking. Her mother Mira would appear on screen looking years older than when Priya had left, the stress of debt etched into every line on her face. Her father Rajesh, once proud and strong, now worked double shifts just to pay the interest on loans that seemed to grow larger each month. Beta, her mother would say through tears, "We believe in you. You will save us all, won't you?" Priya would nod and smile, promising everything would be fine, while inside she felt the weight of impossible expectations crushing her spirit. Her previous attempt at love had ended in devastating failure. Jake, a Canadian university student she'd genuinely cared for, had disappeared from her life the moment her visa complications became real. The relationship had taught her a harsh lesson about the transactional nature of love when survival was at stake. It was during her darkest moments that Priya discovered the underground network of marriage for papers, schemes that operated within Toronto's international student community. Late-night conversations in coffee shops near campus revealed a hidden world where desperate young women shared strategies for finding Canadian husbands. The advice was always the same. Older, divorced men were the easiest targets. They were lonely, vulnerable, and desperate to prove their worth to themselves and others. Priya spent months researching this strategy, practicing her innocent Indian girl persona in front of mirrors, perfecting a Canadian accent that made her sound less foreign and more approachable. She studied psychology articles about male midlife crises, learning to identify the signs of men who could be manipulated through their insecurities. It was calculated, cold, and completely necessary for her survival. What she needed was the perfect target, and her research had led her to identify exactly that. David. The wedding that followed was nothing short of spectacular. Held at an exclusive Toronto venue overlooking the harbour, it brought together 200 of the city's most influential tech and business leaders. Professional videographer James Martinez captured every moment for social media consumption, creating content that would rack up millions of views across platforms. Priya's wedding dress, costing $25,000, was a stunning fusion of Canadian and Indian design that perfectly symbolized their supposed cross-cultural union. Priya's family members were actually paid actors from a local Indian theatre company, coached to play their roles perfectly. Her emotional tears during the ceremony, her heartfelt vows about finding her soulmate in David, her gracious acceptance of congratulations from Toronto's elite, all of it was performance art at the highest level. The reception featured speech after speech about love conquering cultural boundaries and the beautiful diversity of Canadian romance. The hashtag #DavidPriya reached millions of people worldwide, with their story being picked up by international media as an example of how love could bridge any gap. David's pride was visible in every photo. Here was proof that he was still desirable, still capable of winning the heart of a beautiful young woman. His children Marcus and Sophie even attended, charmed despite themselves by Priya's respectful behavior and apparent devotion to their father. Immigration paperwork was filed within 48 hours of the wedding ceremony, with Priya's application for permanent residency fast-tracked due to her marriage to a Canadian citizen. She quit her part-time job at the boutique to focus on being a good Indian wife, moving into David's penthouse and redecorating it with his unlimited budget. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a bachelor pad became a warm, welcoming home filled with carefully chosen art and furniture that reflected both their backgrounds. Priya's Instagram account exploded to over 100,000 followers as people around the world followed their perfect life. Daily posts showed luxury shopping trips to Yorkville, expensive dinners at Toronto's finest restaurants, romantic getaways to Muskoka and Niagara Falls. Her captions were masterpieces of performance, grateful for my amazing husband David who shows me new wonders every day, and living the Canadian dream with my forever love. The comments sections were filled with envious admirers calling them relationship goals and praising their beautiful cross-cultural love story. Priya became a minor celebrity in Toronto's young professional scene, invited to speak at events about successful integration and multicultural relationships. She played the role perfectly, always gracious, always humble, always expressing gratitude for the opportunities Canada had given her. David, meanwhile, sent proud video messages to his children about finally being happy again. His journal entries from this period show a man transformed. I wake up every morning grateful that she chose me. Priya makes me feel like the man I always wanted to be. Successful, protective, needed. For the first time since the divorce, I feel like my life has meaning beyond work. But fairy tales, as everyone knows, aren't real. The first cracks in paradise appeared around 6 months after the wedding, subtle at first but growing more obvious to anyone paying close attention. Priya's affection, once spontaneous and overwhelming, became mechanical and scheduled. She would kiss David goodbye in the morning and hello in the evening with the precision of someone following a script. Her interest in his work stories, previously so engaged and thoughtful, shifted focus entirely to immigration timelines and permanent residency requirements. Priya began spending entire days away from the penthouse, claiming she was exploring Toronto's Indian community or volunteering with newcomer organizations. Her designer shopping bills reached $15,000 monthly, justified as networking expenses and cultural wardrobe needs. The mysterious phone calls to her mother Mira in Mumbai became more frequent and more secretive, conducted in rapid Hindi behind closed doors. The generation gap that had seemed charming during their courtship now became a source of visible irritation for Priya. She would roll her eyes when David didn't understand social media trends or appeared bored during his business dinners with what she privately called old people. She requested separate bedrooms, citing David's old man habits like early bedtimes and morning news routines that disrupted her schedule. Most telling were the young friends Priya began inviting to the penthouse, other Indian students and young professionals who would look at David with barely concealed amusement. They would speak Hindi among themselves, occasionally bursting into laughter while glancing at David in ways that made him feel like he was the butt of jokes he couldn't understand. When he tried to join their conversations, Priya would explain that they were discussing cultural things he wouldn't find interesting. David began noticing other troubling details. Banking records showed money transfers to unknown accounts in Mumbai that Priya couldn't adequately explain. Her detailed knowledge of Canadian immigration law seemed far beyond what any normal international student would need to know. When he surprised her with gifts or romantic gestures, her reactions seemed rehearsed rather than genuine, as if she was reminding herself to appear grateful. Most concerning was what David discovered when he tried to surprise her at the university library where she claimed to spend her days studying. Multiple visits found no trace of her, with librarians saying they'd never seen anyone matching her description. Her professors, when contacted under the guise of planning a surprise celebration, seemed barely familiar with her despite her claimed dedication to her studies. Yet David rationalized away each red flag. The money transfers were for her struggling family. Of course she would want to help them. Her knowledge of immigration law showed she was taking her future in Canada seriously. Her lack of enthusiasm for his gestures was cultural difference, not lack of feeling. He wanted so desperately to believe in their fairy tale that he ignored the mounting evidence that it was all an elaborate fiction. The digital discovery that shattered David's world came during a routine IT security check on their home network. As someone who'd built his career on technology, David was meticulous about cybersecurity, regularly scanning for vulnerabilities and unauthorized access. What he found hidden in encrypted folders on their shared computer destroyed not just his marriage, but his faith in his own judgment. The evidence was comprehensive and devastating. Detailed timelines noting 24-month minimum cohabitation requirement for spousal sponsorship. Screenshots of Reddit forums with discussions about how to maximize spousal support after marriage fraud. Draft divorce papers dated exactly 2 years and 2 weeks after their wedding. The minimum time required to maintain permanent residency status after spousal sponsorship. Most damning was a WhatsApp group chat titled Canadian Wives Club, where Priya regularly communicated with other Indian women who had successfully executed similar marriage fraud schemes. Photos revealed a secret downtown apartment Priya had been renting throughout their marriage, complete with furniture and personal belongings that suggested it was her real home while the penthouse was merely a stage for her performance. David sat in his home office, surrounded by printed evidence of his own gullibility, and felt something inside him break. This wasn't just betrayal, it was complete character assassination. Every loving word, every tender moment, every expression of gratitude and affection had been a calculated lie designed to exploit his loneliness and desperation. David Thompson hadn't become a tech industry legend by accepting defeat. If Priya thought she could manipulate him and disappear with his assets, she had seriously underestimated the man she'd chosen as her target. David's methodical mind, The same analytical approach that had built algorithms worth millions, now focused entirely on gathering evidence for the biggest case of his life. Using his extensive tech expertise, David began recovering deleted files and communications from every device in their home. He installed hidden surveillance equipment throughout the penthouse, discovering that Priya had been secretly recording him for months, documenting evidence of controlling and abusive behavior to support her eventual claims of victimization. The irony wasn't lost on him. While he'd been falling in love, she'd been building a legal case against him. Every argument, every moment of frustration, every time he'd questioned her activities had been recorded and catalogued as proof of his abusive nature. David contacted Catherine Rodriguez, Toronto's top immigration fraud lawyer, and began building what would become a 200-page case file documenting every aspect of Priya's deception. Bank records, communication logs, social media evidence, witness statements from friends who'd noticed her suspicious behavior. Everything was meticulously organized and verified. He approached this investigation like he approached complex coding problems, systematically, thoroughly, leaving no stone unturned. But Priya had her own surveillance operation running. She realized their home network was being monitored when her secret communications began experiencing technical difficulties. The discovery of David's hidden cameras sent her into high alert mode, and she began her own evidence collection documenting what she framed as his increasingly controlling and paranoid behavior. She researched David's business vulnerabilities, identifying key relationships and reputation sensitivities that could be exploited. Her beauty, youth, and apparent vulnerability would be weapons in the coming battle. The psychological warfare had begun in earnest. Priya documented their age-gap relationship through a lens of inherent exploitation, building a narrative that would resonate with any jury or immigration panel. She understood the optics perfectly: a powerful older white man and a vulnerable young Indian immigrant. The story would write itself, and she would be the victim, not the perpetrator. The nuclear confrontation came on a quiet weekend when they were alone in the penthouse. David had spent weeks preparing for this moment, organizing evidence like he was presenting to a board of directors. But this wasn't about corporate strategy. This was about the destruction of everything he'd believed about love, trust, and his own judgment. "We need to talk," David said, his voice steady despite the emotional hurricane raging inside him. He laid out printed evidence across their dining room table like he was dealing cards in a game where the stakes were his entire future. Bank transfers, forum screenshots, dating profiles, lease agreements for her secret apartment. Every piece of documentation that proved their marriage was an elaborate fraud. "I've already filed a complaint with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada," he continued, watching Priya's face for any sign of genuine emotion. "The investigation meeting is scheduled for next week. I have 200 pages of evidence showing that our entire marriage was immigration fraud." For a moment, Priya's mask slipped completely. The innocent, grateful young wife vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating 20-year-old who had been running a long-term con game. No tears, no apologies, no attempts at explanation. Just the sudden appearance of someone David had never met before. Someone who looked at him with pure strategic assessment rather than any human emotion. "You think you're so smart," Priya said, her accent shifting subtly as she dropped the carefully practiced Canadian inflection. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with. You want to destroy me? I'll destroy you first." Her counterattack was swift and vicious. She had been preparing for this possibility, collecting evidence of what she would frame as David's exploitation of a vulnerable young immigrant. The 30-year age gap would work in her favor with any jury, she explained calmly. Society would naturally sympathize with a beautiful young Indian woman claiming abuse by a powerful older white man. "Who do you think they'll believe?" Priya asked, producing a tablet filled with photos, videos, and audio recordings. The creepy old man who bought himself a young foreign wife, or the innocent girl who was trapped in an abusive marriage. She showed him carefully staged photos of bruises, recordings of their arguments edited to make him sound controlling and threatening, documentation of expensive gifts that could be framed as attempts to buy her silence and compliance. The cultural and age weapons in her arsenal were devastating. She would claim he had exploited her desperation, used his wealth and status to coerce her into marriage, isolated her from her community and family. "You're a pathetic old white man who bought himself a young Indian wife," she said with chilling matter-of-factness. "Everyone will see you as a predator who exploited a vulnerable immigrant." The threats escalated quickly. She would contact Marcus and Sophie with evidence of their father's abusive behavior toward his young wife. She would make sure everyone in Toronto's tech community knew exactly what kind of man he really was. The viral nature of their social media presence would work against him. Global audiences would see their relationship through the lens of an older man's exploitation of a young immigrant's vulnerability. But perhaps her most devastating weapon was a recording she'd made during one of their intimate moments, capturing David saying he owned her and had paid for her love, words spoken in passion that could be twisted into evidence of his predatory mindset. The recording would destroy not just his marriage, but his entire reputation and career. But David had built his career on making difficult decisions under pressure, and he wasn't about to be intimidated by someone he now recognized as a master manipulator. Despite the devastating nature of her threats, despite knowing she could destroy his reputation and relationships, he refused to back down. "You can threaten me all you want," David said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "But I'm not withdrawing the complaint. The immigration meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday. I've already provided all my evidence to the authorities. This marriage is over, and you're going to face the consequences of what you've done." He showed her copies of the restraining order he'd filed, the changes he'd made to his will and insurance policies, the security modifications to the penthouse. Priya's face went through a series of calculations as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. Her fairy tale life was ending in criminal charges and deportation. Her immigration lawyer Mr. Harrison had already confirmed that David's evidence was overwhelming. She was looking at a minimum 5-year prison sentence plus immediate deportation back to India. She contacted other members of her fraud network who had faced similar exposure, but their advice was unanimous: run. Get out of the country before the authorities could act. But running would mean returning to Mumbai with nothing, facing her family's disappointment and the debt that had driven her to this desperate gambit in the first place. That's when Priya's mind turned to a darker possibility. She reviewed David's insurance policies, his will, his business succession plans. What if instead of fleeing like a criminal, she could become a grieving widow? The life insurance alone was worth $2 million, plus she would inherit his penthouse and assets. With David gone, there would be no one to testify against her, no evidence of fraud that couldn't be explained away. Priya disappeared to her secret apartment for 48 hours, and David assumed she was planning to flee Canada before the investigation could proceed. He changed all security codes, removed her access to accounts, and arranged to stay at his friend Michael's house during the immigration proceedings. But Priya wasn't planning to run. She was planning something far more permanent. Using her chemistry background, she researched untraceable methods of elimination. Her university lab access gave her the means to acquire necessary materials. She studied David's routines, his security patterns, his vulnerability windows. If she could make his death appear accidental or stress-related, she could solve all her problems at once. In a chilling voice recording she made in Hindi, Priya's true nature was finally revealed. "David thinks he's destroyed my life. Now I'll destroy his." The innocent young bride was gone forever, replaced by someone capable of the ultimate betrayal. Love had become a weapon, and marriage had become a murder plot. 2 days after their devastating confrontation, Priya returned to the penthouse appearing completely broken. Gone was the cold, calculating woman who had threatened to destroy David's life. In her place stood what appeared to be a devastated young woman accepting defeat. Her eyes were red from crying, her usual perfect appearance disheveled, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had lost everything. "David," she said softly, standing in the doorway like a lost child. "I know you hate me now, and you have every right to. I've been thinking about what you said, about the investigation, about everything. You're right. I need to face the consequences of what I've done." David watched her carefully, his guard still up despite her apparent transformation. But there was something different about her demeanor, a resignation that seemed genuine, a vulnerability that reminded him of the woman he thought he'd fallen in love with. "I want to end things properly," Priya continued, stepping into the apartment that had been their shared home. Before they deport me. Before this becomes even messier than it already is. Could we have one final dinner together? To say goodbye to our fairy tale properly. Her choice of words was deliberate. Their fairy tale had been the foundation of their public romance, and now she was acknowledging its end. David hesitated. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was another manipulation, another performance designed to gain some advantage. But looking at her now, seeing what appeared to be genuine remorse and acceptance, he found himself nodding. One dinner, he agreed. Then you pack your things and leave. Priya spent the afternoon preparing an elaborate Indian feast, recreating the meal from their very first date when she'd cooked for him in this same kitchen. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. She was using her chemistry background, but this time for a purpose David couldn't imagine. Every spice, every ingredient was carefully measured and prepared with the precision of someone conducting a laboratory experiment. As evening fell, Priya set the dining table with their wedding china and lit candles throughout the room. She'd even opened a bottle of their wedding champagne, Dom Perignon, that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. To remember the good times, she said, raising her glass with what appeared to be genuine emotion. David, I need you to know something, she began, her performance flawless in its apparent sincerity. Somewhere along the way, despite everything I planned, despite the original reasons I approached you, I did fall in love with you. Maybe not the way you deserved, maybe not purely, but it was real. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, and for a moment, David felt his heart soften despite everything he knew about her deception. I lost myself in desperation to stay in Canada, Priya continued. I became someone I never wanted to be, someone who could hurt a good man like you. I'm so sorry, David. I know sorry isn't enough, but I needed you to hear it before everything ends. David found himself moved by her apparent remorse. This was the woman he'd thought he married, vulnerable, honest, seeking forgiveness. When she excused herself to use the bathroom, he sat alone with his champagne, wondering if perhaps there had been some genuine feeling beneath all the lies. What David didn't know was that during her bathroom break, Priya had added a colorless, tasteless compound to his champagne, a delayed action formula she'd synthesized using her chemistry knowledge and materials acquired from the university lab. The substance was designed to mimic the symptoms of a stress-induced heart attack, something that would seem entirely plausible given the immigration investigation and the collapse of their marriage. As they finished dinner, David began to feel unwell. The symptoms started subtly, a slight tightness in his chest, some difficulty breathing. I don't feel quite right, he said, loosening his tie. Maybe all this stress is finally catching up with me. Priya immediately switched into concerned wife mode, her performance worthy of an Academy Award. David, you look pale. Should I call 911? When he nodded, she made the call with perfect panic in her voice, describing symptoms that exactly matched what the poison was designed to produce. My husband is having chest pains, she sobbed into the phone. He's been under so much stress lately with work and, please, just send someone quickly. As she coached the 911 operator through David's symptoms, she was simultaneously ensuring that the poison completed its work. David died believing that Priya was desperately trying to save his life. What investigators would later discover was security camera footage showing Priya practicing this exact 911 call hours earlier, rehearsing her panic and timing her responses to create the perfect performance. The fairy tale that had captivated millions was ending not with a happily ever after, but with premeditated murder. Priya's cover-up strategy was as meticulously planned as everything else she'd done. She staged the scene to suggest a stress-induced cardiac event, planting evidence of David's deteriorating mental health over the immigration investigation. She created a fake suicide note on his computer referencing guilt over making false accusations against his innocent wife, then deleted all evidence of immigration fraud from their devices. When first responders arrived, they found the perfect tableau. A grieving young Indian widow holding her dead husband, sobbing over the tragic end to their cross-cultural love story. The media sensation that followed was exactly what Priya had calculated. News coverage focused on the tragic end to Toronto's fairy tale romance. Social media exploded with sympathy for the heartbroken young widow, who had lost her soulmate to stress and paranoia. Priya gave tearful interviews about losing David to the pressure of false accusations, painting herself as the victim of his deteriorating mental state. Their wedding video was viewed millions of times as people mourned what they believed was a tragic love story cut short. A GoFundMe established by sympathetic supporters reached $100,000 within days. With David's death, Priya prepared to inherit his $3.2 million penthouse and significant assets. She planned to use the inheritance to establish a new identity in a different country, maintaining her grieving widow performance while secretly planning her disappearance. Insurance companies began processing the $2 million life insurance claim that would set her up for life. But the investigation that followed would unravel everything. Immigration lawyer Catherine Rodriguez contacted police about David's scheduled fraud meeting. Autopsy results revealed chemical compounds inconsistent with natural death. Digital forensics recovered all the evidence Priya thought she'd deleted. The university lab reported missing chemicals that matched the toxicology findings. Most damning was the security footage revealing Priya's practice sessions and timeline inconsistencies in her story. Her chemistry professor Dr. Martin confirmed her knowledge to create undetectable poisons. WhatsApp messages revealed her plan to eliminate the problem permanently. Priya was arrested during David's televised memorial service in a moment of pure dramatic irony. The trial became an international sensation, with evidence overwhelming motive, means, opportunity, and clear premeditation. The jury deliberated for only 45 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. The final twist came during sentencing when investigators revealed that Priya was part of an international marriage fraud ring with 12 other victims across North America. David Thompson had been just one target in a sophisticated operation that had been destroying lives for years. David and Priya's wedding video has been viewed over 50 million times, but now for all the wrong reasons. What Toronto celebrated as a beautiful cross-cultural love story became a cautionary tale about the deadly price of dreams. Priya Sharma was 20 years old and turned love into a weapon, marriage into murder, and social media perfection into the perfect cover for the perfect crime. David Thompson was 50 and learned too late that some fairy tales end in graveyards. This case fundamentally changed how Canada investigates age-gap immigration marriages and led to new protections for vulnerable sponsors. Because sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one who looks like a princess, and the deadliest trap is the one that goes viral. Today, their story serves as a warning that in the age of social media, even fairy tales can kill. Thompson.